Sorry, good afternoon to everyone who's joining. Sorry we're a couple of minutes late opening the doors, but we just have Mark who's gone to find his presentation. So hopefully not too long. So if you just bear with us, we don't have a poll today for those of you who are used to doing a poll. What we may well do, and it depends how we go, is we may well ask some questions and use polling for a bit of fun on Zoom, which you'll find at the bottom. But we'll see how it goes. I mean, Mark is going to give us a presentation. It's an interesting topic, certainly interesting for me. I've been around the world of collaboration with organizations for over 30 years. It's something that the construction sector has had promoted to it for nearly 30 years as well. But it's something that's not widely adopted. So it'll be interesting to see from Mark's experience how it went for him, given that it's a major construction project. So Mark, have we found it? Is the presentation? Yeah, super. Okay. So I was just telling people that, you know, collaboration is not something that's widely adopted.
Yeah. So if you, hello everybody, Mark here. If you get a chance, pop my presentation up, but I guess, are you happy for me just to start?
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I seem to drop out. Can you hear me okay, Mark?
Yeah, you're back now. Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Glitched, got a bit of a drop there. Okay, so.
Well, you've dropped again. You're on mute now. You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, got you now.
Yeah,
perfect.
sort of got a glitch. Sorry about that for everyone. Do bear with me. I don't know what's happened at my end. But welcome, Mark. I'm going to hand over to you. And please, if people have questions today, if you'd like to put them into the chat pane, that would be great. So, Mark, over to you. Many thanks.
Yeah, and if you do, I've sent my presentation through. If you do get it, flash it up on the screen. But other than that, I can just continue talking, really. So
we'll put it up as soon as we get it. There you go.
Well, there we go. It's there. So yeah, hello everybody. So I'm Mark. I'm the artist formerly known as the CEO of Crossrail. So I left Crossrail in June after we opened the railway, and I'm now the CEO of SGN, which is the gas transmission network and distribution network in Scotland and Southern England. So, and if you click the next button, please, and we'll look at the next slide. Crossrail, also known as the Elizabeth Line, what was it? A lot of people know what it is. It was Crossrail's this east-west railway underneath London, first thought of in the 40s, the 1840s. So the first time somebody thought of an underground railway in London was east-west was 1840, which is Paddington Basin. The canal companies wanted to get their goods to Tilbury docks to avoid, but that time was street congestion and air quality with the amount of horses and carts. So 1840 was when it all started. Appeared in the Abercrombie Report after the Second World War, 1974 Rail Plan, and in this incarnation, it's been taken 22 years of planning, execution, commissioning to get to where we are. And we opened the railway on the 24th of May. What's it all about? Well, you know, it's not a tube line. It's a full-size mainline railway, 30 meters underneath London, connecting two railways together. So it's kind of not a tube line. It's more like what you might see in Paris with the RER. But anyway, next slide, please. There's a graphical representation here of what it is. The Crossrail bit's the kind of center right pinky bit, which is the iconic bit that people think about Crossrail. But really what Crossrail's doing is joining the Great Western Railway in the west to the Great Eastern Railway in the east. The two blue lines either side of the kind of iconic central section. 10 new stations, lots of them big underground, London Underground, 10 stories in the ground. And really what it's doing is connecting the Great Western to the Great Eastern and dramatically reducing journey time and, connecting, I think, 1.5 million people into the central activity zone of London. Should have cost 15.9 billion. If you click the button, please, you'll find out that it cost 20 billion. So it's a 27% overrun in cost and about a 30% overrun in time, which in the scale of mega programs in the world, it isn't too bad. But of course, it wasn't really very good that we got into the ditch and had to get out of it. And we're going to talk in the next 20 minutes why Crossrail ended up in such difficulty, how it got out, and some insights maybe about the future, about, what did we learn in delivering Crossrail. Next button, please. So the extra resonance, of course, isn't it, giving this presentation and talking about the Elizabeth line when the sad passing of Queen Elizabeth just 2 weeks ago. Quite an honor, really, that her last major last major public event was that she opened the Elizabeth line for us on the 23rd of May. And I was there that day. I met her, and she was, her eyes were sparkling like diamonds. And she is undoubtedly the most remarkable leader of my lifetime and a remarkable woman. And what an honor to name the Elizabeth line after. Next button, please. Now, we're going to talk a lot about the disasters of Crossrail, but when it opened, there you go. We lit the whole city in purple. All of the sins of the past were forgotten about. And since then, the railway's gone from success to success. It's opened to great acclaim. I was on it just the other day, and it's got all the hallmarks of great infrastructure that it's always been there. People think it's always kind of been there. So although we've forgotten and forgiven a lot of the problems, I want to look at why Crossrail got into difficulty and how it got out of it in the spirit of learning. So next button, please. Now, in every story like Crossrail, you kind of want somebody to blame. And this bloke would be a good guy, wouldn't it, if we could find this guy to blame. But unfortunately for the story, there's no one person to blame for Crossrail. And 2009 started construction. Common of all major projects around the world, that there is a lot of political kind of interest and drive. And this project had a lot of it. The political influence and the political kind of sponsorship of this program was very, very significant. And in 2009 at Canary Wharf, we started construction. Next button, please. Yeah, so I love this quote from Tony Meggs. It was the greatest program in the world until it wasn't. One more click, please. And one of the big problems on Crossrail was it broke a few iron laws of railways and major programs. And in every major program, particularly railway integration, realistically, it's a third, after you start construction, it's a third of major civils, a third of installation, and in Crossrail's sense, a third of commissioning. So three big phases of a project. And Crossrail's first mistake was more to think of it as two phases, civil engineering and then fit out, kind of including the integration in with the fit out. And this is a picture from, I think, November 14, David Cameron. He looks like 10 feet tall in that picture, doesn't he? Which I don't understand. And the project declared itself half complete in 2014, which was the first mistake, because actually the major civils were complete, but the reality was it was a third complete. It wasn't half complete, because there was a great underestimation of the effort to integrate the railway at the end of the program. One more button, please. And I think even more compounded, there's Boris again in the background. This is March the 23rd, 2016. I know the date because in that afternoon, I was interviewed by Boris Johnson to be the managing director of London Underground. Luckily, I got the job. But on the morning, they'd presented the Queen the honour, I think, or it was honour for us, to name the Elizabeth line after Her Majesty the Queen. And this is kind of March 16. There are 2.5 years to go. And at that point, the project thought it was 80% complete. And the team were very, very confident. You don't name something after the Queen unless you're very confident. One more click, please. Right, July 18, problems. July 18, there is 6 months to go to opening, and the truth is the project unraveled. There was clear that we couldn't make December 18, and we might need another 9 months at least. And that was quite a shock. You know, it dropped out of the sky, really, that project had troubles. Because up to July 18, the narrative had been that we would open it at the end of 2018 on time and on budget. So this was quite a big deal. Quite a shock was revealed. One more click, please. And I was asked to take over the program. The leadership team were changed. I was running the Tube. I was on the board of Crossrail, and they asked me to become the CEO of Crossrail to see it to the end. And probably the worst headline I've ever had in my career was I had to go to Parliament and admit that I had no idea how to complete the project, because the project was in quite a muddle. And you might ask, how on earth could the world's greatest project become the world's worst overnight? And I think it's worth kind of unpacking. Next slide, please. Firstly, I think, hopefully anybody listening to this, I'd encourage you to really think about where you are in major programs that you deal with, or where you are in the supply chain of programs. And the truth is, Crossrail was always two projects. It was civil engineering. The 42-kilometer tunneling drive underneath London is probably the world's most complex job. Weaving your way through the Tube, around the skyscrapers. You've got 2,000 years of archaeology. You've got to get underneath the river. So the left-hand side was expertly done. The right-hand side, though, it was an advanced digital railway. Now, obviously, a timing thing occurred here that for some reason on the project, and I think it's a cultural issue, a psychological issue, more intervention happened on the left-hand side because the risks were right in front of you. The tunnel boring machines were about to be launched. The right-hand side, though, you might say the project lived in the house of risk. It lived in a world where mitigations were written down that somebody in the future would resolve. Now, this is very, very important. So the project was kind of schizophrenic in 2009, 2010, when you look back. It lived in the house of intervention of tunneling and major civils. It was intervening. On the right-hand side, though, it was also at that moment living in the house of risk, i.e. writing mitigations in the future that somebody would have to catch. And I think this schism, this kind of a dual personality, this kind of difference of approach is the main reason that Crossrail became untangled. Next slide, please. What went wrong? Well, I'll save you the reading of I think there's approximately 1,000 pages of parliamentary inquiries and Natural Audit Office and KPMG, and everybody looked at this. But fundamentally, what went wrong is kind of in the second and the fourth bullet point. So in July 18, the effort to integrate was greatly underestimated. Things that have taken us a year to do were estimated that it would take a month. On the fourth bullet point, to compound that problem, not only was the future underestimated, it was overestimated where the project was today. So on July 18, the project thought it was 97.1% complete. Note the 0.1% spurious accuracy. The truth is that I worked out in my first 6 months being the CEO, it was really only 60% complete. And a mind-blowing stat for you that blew my mind at the time was there were 75,000 things missing from the client program that were embedded in punchworks and defects lists of the supply chain. 75,000 things were missing, which is the difference we're 97% complete. No, you're not. You're 60% complete. So the question really is, how did the world's best team, and this was the best team that the world would have at the moment, at this time, it was Europe's biggest project, and it was the 4th biggest in the world, and the cream of the crop was running this job. How on earth did they get into a black hole in 2018? Next slide, please. Here's a model for you that I think is quite interesting if you're interested in major programs and uncertainty and collaboration. I'll give you a model here. Possibility on the bottom axis, ambition, how ambitious do you want to be, low to high, and on the vertical axis, how realistic do you understand the truth? Not the perception of reality, the deterministic reality. So simple grid. One click, please. And I think what happened is in 2014, the truth is that in 2014, when Dave Cameron was giving that speech, there was a program on the table in 2014 that revealed that it wasn't 4 years to go, it could have been 6. So there was an idea in 2014 that the bust in the program could be 2 years. Between 2014 and 2017, they descended, and I was on the board, I'm not blameless in this, we descended into an unreality by 2017, where the same ambition was retained. The 9th of December 2018 is when the program will open, but the reality was slipped away. In that vertical descent from 2014 to 2017, that is when 75,000 things slipped off the client's integrated schedule and disappeared into the supply chain's punchwork list. Obviously, when I was asked to take over the project, you do not want to be in that bottom 2018 corner, which is where you've got no reality and no possibility. One click, please. And the story is that we, under kind of the team I got, who were a brilliant team, we kind of went around the circle again. And if you click the button, please, I think the catalyzing event that caused this journey around this checkerboard was naming a fixed end date many years in advance. And this is a great mistake. Everybody recognizes. No major program in the world is doing this. I've been very lucky to look at almost every major program in the world that you can get access to. And nobody is daft enough now, years in advance, to name the date of the opening of the railway. Everybody talks in windows of uncertainty now, and that's a direct result of what happened on Crossrail. So I think this date was named 6 or 7 years in advance, and of course it catalyzed a culture on the program of delivery at all costs. And particularly that descent from 2014 to 17 was because there was an iron law in the program that we had to deliver it by, the Queen had been booked. And I think that's been proven to be quite a false premise. And if we're 4 billion and 4 years late, I think the journey around this checkerboard was an unnecessary waste of 2 years and 2 billion. But it would have taken a very brave person in 2016, at the moment they named it the Elizabeth line, to say we have trouble. And I think there's a story there. Next slide, please. So here's, if you wanted to get anything from this presentation, I would greatly encourage you to laminate this and put it under your pillows. I believe high performance exists with maximum possibility, but maximum reality. So be very ambitious, but keep 2 feet in reality, the green high performance. And for a long time, Crossrail, unbeknown to everybody, lived in that red box, the fantasy. You don't want to be in the gray box either. You do not want to be hyper reality, yet stuck in the drift. Now you see a lot of this, don't you, in other major programs where you just can't get the work done and people procrastinate. Things get stuck in the drift. So the gray and the red are not great places to be. And the question is, as leaders, how do you stay in the green, high performance, when even the best in the world in Crossrail got dragged into fantasy? And I think I've just got a couple of slides now that might help with that. Next slide, please. First one, and this is kind of fundamental, I think. Crossrail started with an idea of modularity, build things in factories, bring them to site and plug them in. Left-hand picture is from early days in the program. It was a factory in East London about the modular componentry of Crossrail, plug and play, really successful. And if you travel on the Elizabeth line, you'll recognize the things that you're looking at on the left-hand side. They really did do a good job on modularity. Unfortunately, the right-hand picture is a bit of a disaster. This is a tiny corner of the Elizabeth line. It's a floating cantilevered entrance to Farringdon Station. And obviously something's gone horribly wrong here. That gate is a £2 million gate that's motorized. It's every time I've been there, I must have been in that corner 100 times. There's always somebody with an orange jacket fiddling with it. Why isn't it a modular Bostwick, classic London Underground Bostwick gate? And the truth is that it's because towards the end of the program, that descent into fantasy, one thing that got lost was the concepts of modularity. And here, the oversight development architect has designed something before we've actually finished the design of the station, which has left this very, very strange modular gate. It's one tiny example of hundreds. And when I took over Crossrail, we had 10,000 operatives working 30 meters below London trying to integrate it. How did we go from the left to the right? And I think it goes back to the reliance on a singular end date. And when the pressure came on, people compromised design modularity, started to fit things in the field before the design was finished in the office, to disastrous. So a big lesson for everybody listening to this: modularity and simplicity are essential. Next slide, please. If you wanted the flip side of my high performance grid, when you laminate this and put it under your pillow, so here's another 2x2 for you. Complexity on the bottom and the extent of coordination. I'll call it coordination, not collaboration, on the vertical. So number one, simplify and remove complexity. But even once you've done that, Crossrail and other major programs are inherently complex and risky. So you are going to be left with residual complexity no matter what you simplify. And my belief is, as complexity increases, so does the need for the central client to coordinate. Very profound, very, very profound kind of ethos that as complexity increases, the client must intervene and coordinate. And in Crossrail, I call that the productive zone. And in Crossrail, unfortunately, they lived for a long time in this descent to unreality, in chaos, i.e., it was highly complex, but the center became light touch in coordination. And there was a reason for that. It was an expert supply chain. The client did not want to intervene because they feared they'd disturb the commercial bargain. They'd disturb the risk allocation. There'd be contractual claims. So for a long period of time on Crossrail, it thought it was in a collaborative environment. But the reality was, because it wasn't being coordinated, being prioritized, it was kind of living in chaos, unbeknown to everybody. My best example is fire engineering. So in London, there's about 50 people who have certification to sign off the fire. Most of those 50 people worked for a company called Protec, an excellent company, brilliant, tier 2 company. And they were working for about, 16 of my 30 tier 1 contractors. But I didn't know that Protec were being pulled from pillar to post by the supply chain. So the classic for coordination for me was I intervened, I pulled Protec out, and I told everybody, this is the sequence you're going to receive Protec resources. Now, obviously, the station at the end, which happened to be Paddington, I did indeed get a commercial claim about delay. But the productivity of Protec in fire engineering, which was utterly critical, went from 8% to 95% with the effect of the client's coordination. So I think these two 2x2 grids are really important before you even talk about collaboration. Are you simplifying? And the residual complexity that you're left with, are you coordinating it? Next slide, please. Classic governance structure on Crossrail. It was a delivery authority. It was a 50-50 joint venture between the UK government and London, expertly sponsored by Transport for London and the Department for Transport. Crossrail board, I was sitting on the board. good board, excellent chair, Sir Terry Morgan. It had a great executive team, and of course it had all the bells and whistles. Click a button, please. It also had 4 layers of assurance, the classic 4 layers of assurance. So you might say, how on earth, Mark, with the best in the world on the left-hand side and the best scrutineers and assurers on the right-hand side, how did everybody miss it? And I'd click a button, please. I would think the structure was in place, but there was the wrong mindset. And people were just simply not looking. They weren't curious to look for the issues. Everybody got blinded by the mission to get the railway open on the 9th of December. And it took away a word that I think is essential. It's another word that begins with C, like collaboration, like coordination, and it's curiosity. The reason Crossrail's black hole emerged, with the technical and programmatic things I've said, the reason it wasn't detected was the project team, the board, the sponsors, and the assurers fundamentally lacked a curiosity about, are we really sure? And I think this speaks to, a different style of leadership that might be needed, because the reason that this occurred, Crossrail is so large, it's as big as the ocean, this issue hid in plain sight. That's kind of the issue, that without curiosity to find it, it can hide in plain sight. And one click, please. And I think we're getting to the end of my presentation. Two things helped me get Crossrail out of the ditch and over the line. And they're beyond collaboration. Crossrail thought it had a collaborative environment. It won awards for it. But I think we need to go beyond that into 2 areas. Firstly, transparency. I've already said this thing's bigger than the ocean and is unknowable by a person or a small group of people. It's impossible for a small group of people to know Crossrail. It's too big. So transparency is all. The ability for every corner of the program to speak truth to power. And on Crossrail, on the descent to fantasy, it became opaque and people couldn't speak truth to power. Now, it's nobody's fault. Nobody's suppressed any information. There's a great set of values actually in Crossrail that were about transparency. The truth is the program was not transparent, it was opaque. So, number 1, create the environment of transparency and truth to power. Second, other side of the coin. Collaboration is an overused word. We've used a different word, owning the whole. And owning the whole is beyond collaboration. Collaboration is kind of, some of the actors in the play understanding the intersectionality between them and dependencies and working together collaboratively on it. That's collaboration. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient in a major program. What's needed is owning the whole. And the difference is, in owning the whole, everybody in the coalition, all the actors, are purposefully going to the end state. And the end state of Crossrail was not world-class engineering. It was not on time, on budget. The end state of Crossrail was the Elizabeth Line, operated by 2,000 brilliant men and women. It was to carry 200 million people every year safely and reliably, and it was to take no more than 25 minutes from Paddington to Abbey Wood. That was the purpose of Crossrail. And I used to think of these programs like a baton race, like the delivery team passing the baton to the operator who'd sprint away. I now realize that was completely flawed. It's much more like an obstacle course race, like a Tough Mudder, where you've all got to cross the line together. There was no point me trying to pass the baton to operations without going back to get ProTech out of the mud, because there were two barriers behind. So for me, when people talk about collaboration, I'd invite any questions. Yes, be collaborative, but in major programs now, with the complexity and the scale and the drive to net zero and digitization, 2 things matter most of all. Is the environment transparent and can people speak truth to power? And secondly, if that is the case, does the whole coalition own the whole, not just their individual parts, even if they think they're collaborative? And I think I've got one final slide to end on. Thank you very much. People often ask me, well, what was my role? What did I do? Well, I was one of 75,000 people worked on Crossrail over the years, 75,000, nearly filled Wembley Stadium with it. And I've written 5 things down that I think are important in leadership. And these would be the hallmarks of, I think, how you would have a successful major program. I've just said the first one. The importance of a singular higher purpose for all. It was never about the engineering. It was about the railway. And that is really misunderstood by kind of a lot of people who fight from is many years away. From Crossrail, it's got a new operating rule book, as you'd expect. It's a novel mixture of London Underground rules and National Rail rules. For years, there was a working group on the new rules. We didn't stabilize the rule book properly till 4 weeks before we opened it, because it was perpetually in the house of risk. And number 3, crucial, and this is very important. How do you create an environment where people can speak truth to power without fear? How do you remove fear of failure in
We seem to have lost. I seem to have lost Mark. He's reconnecting.
I don't know what happened there actually, but anyway, can you hear me okay now? I'll finish off. So,
I can indeed. Sorry about that. You have the same sort of problem as me, I think.
yeah. So truth to power, and then finally remove fear, and then lastly, a big one really. Can people lead by commitments to each other and the whole rather than their ego? I think the days for the masculine, egocentric leader are gone. And the best thing we can possibly do is to have a very inclusive, kind environment to encourage people to speak truth to power. And intrinsic that is to have as diverse as possible teams. It isn't.
Whoops, cut out again here. Sorry about that. Mark, we're not able to hear you anymore. I don't know whether you can do anything about it. Abraham, are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So it's a problem with Mark. Okay, whilst we wait for Mark to come back, I think we have a raised hand. So just be patient, Alan. And was Mark, I think we have you back again. Yeah.
I'm back, yeah. So I've got the same dodgy connection as you.
Yeah. It's leaked down the line.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm back now, though. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, we've got one hand up from Alan Carr. I don't know, Alan, whether you'd like to come in. Abraham, if you can open his microphone, we'll bring Alan in.
Thank you very much. And I'm just looking from Ireland, and I just have one thing. The chat is disabled, so I wasn't able to type in a question, but I'll ask it if that's okay. Could you identify the suite of contracts that were used within the project? Thank you.
Yeah, it was the NEC target cost predominantly, and expertly administered. The problem was that the risk allocation. I said in my little chart about as complexity increases, the client needs to coordinate. Unfortunately, risks of integration were kind of passed down into the supply chain, and that was a real problem in the NEC. So what you ended up having was a lot of compensation events being raised that were ultimately unresolvable by the individual contractor, which is why we ended up with the incredible number of 75,000 things on defects in Punchworks list, because they were actually unsolvable. Because if I did if I was the person responsible for putting the fire alarm system in, say, I was entirely dependent on somebody putting the conduit up, and I was even dependent on somebody writing the fire strategy. So yeah, the NEC was used, generally expertly done. We've had hardly any claims or contractual problems. The issue on Crossrail was the deployment of risk. The client should have held back a lot of the risk and not put it into the supply chain.
I want to follow up, please.
You carry
Yeah.
on, Alan. Yes, please do.
One of the legacies of the Olympic Development Authority was to maintain an archive of all their lessons learned and their strategies in and around the risk management with the site and the contracts and so on. Is it something that Crossrail might be in the same space of delivering at some point in the future?
What a great question. So, God, I can't remember her name. Fiona, can't remember her surname. Fiona somebody, can't remember her name now. She's terrible. Created the Olympic Learning Legacy. The learning legacy from the Olympics was transferred structurally to Crossrail in 2014. And yeah, there is, if you Google Crossrail Learning Legacy, you'll find yourself in the portal. It's all there. It's over the next couple of months, actually, we're putting in some of the more very end state, but yeah, the learning legacy is alive. It's a vast portal. Have a look at it. And interestingly, HS2 have taken the same structure over just about 9 months ago. So what you should have in the UK is the Olympics, Crossrail, HS2, and I hope Hinckley at some point in a very comprehensive lessons learned. But yeah, have a look at Learning Legacy of Crossrail, and it's very comprehensive. Yeah.
Okay, I wonder if I could pop a question to you, Mark. I've been involved in helping organisations over the years to collaborate in all sorts of ways, whether they've been in joint ventures, branding, various things. And I'm very interested in the word used, the importance of a singular higher purpose. Is that a goal for you? Is that something that, can be clearly articulated that everyone can understand?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not dissing collaboration. All I'm saying is in a major program, Crossrail used to be the biggest in Europe and fourth biggest in the world. Crossrail now would not get in the top 3 in Europe and wouldn't get in the top 10 in the world. So these things are becoming existentially bigger. And what we found in Crossrail, that collaboration was necessary but not sufficient. And the higher purpose implies the sequencing and prioritization of the work by the client to get to the higher purpose. And the higher purpose on Crossrail was a railway that's operable and reliable and safe. For a long period of time, Crossrail's mantra was on time, on budget, world class. That was like the mantra. Not purposeful. So, if you were collaborating in Crossrail, the purpose you were collaborating to was on time, on budget, and world class. Really flawed. What it should have been is it'll be worth the wait. The railway will be worth the wait. And so I'm not down on collaboration. I'm just saying that collaboration needs to exist within something that goes to a higher purpose. And on Crossrail, the biggest single schism was the people building the railway really didn't understand the higher purpose, and the people operating the railway did not understand the compromises that the delivery team would have to make. And there was an illusion of collaboration, but I think in major projects, the first thing to do is to establish the North Star. The biggest mistake on Crossrail is the naming of the end, the opening date 6 years in advance, which catalyzed really strange behaviors. Even though they thought they were being collaborative, you lost, because it was impossible to produce the railway by the end of 2018. You would have revealed immediately that the collaboration was fake. But I don't know, does that resonate with you? I mean, I'm not down on collaboration. I'm just saying it needs to live in a context that's different.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, collaboration to me is one of the most bandied about words in the modern business lexicon, because it assumes that people will naturally collaborate, and humans don't naturally collaborate. There's always the issue of trust, and of course a fear of, if I collaborate, say things to this person, what risk am I taking? So
So I think how well said. I mean, so Crossrail horrendously got the risk transfer wrong. So firstly, the commercial bargain was flawed. So you're exactly right. You've started from the wrong position. But even if you had, I mean, I'll give you a good insight about what you might term trust. There's two ways of trusting somebody, right? There's two ways. Firstly, you could work together for years and years and build up trust. Or you could adopt a mindset of commitment where you're going to trust somebody on day one. My belief is the only way to get to that second nirvana of taking a position of trust on day one is to bind people to the higher purpose on day one. And unfortunately on Crossrail, the people who did the tunneling were bound to a different purpose, which was something like world-class tunneling, not the railway. Unbelievably on Crossrail, the initial major civils were too small. The stations were too small. They had to be mined out because nobody really considered how to operate the railway. So I do take your point about risk transfer, but I've started my new job, and I say to my new leadership team, I'm taking a position of trust on day one. I don't have to work with you. I'm going to take a position of trust. And the reason I can do that is we are bound by a common purpose. And in the job I'm in, our common purpose is to keep the gas in the pipes and don't let it out so it becomes dangerous. That's the purpose of SGN. And it's very clear and obvious. And I'm going to trust people. When it comes to major programs, if people have different purposes and different gods and different risk allocation, trust becomes more the first, where you've got to work together, and you just simply haven't got the time for it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I found trust fits into two categories. What I call transactional trust. That's where people stick to the contracts, and that's where a lot of people in the construction and engineering centre is. This is what the contract says. People deliver to that. We trust them. What you're talking about is the relational trust thing. This is where you build it up, and you don't actually need a contract because you trust people to do what they say. But that's a long way to go between organisations very often.
Yes, it is. And or on day one, you could arrange it to be so. You could get the risk allocation right. You could set the values and behaviours. You could get. I did a lecture to the Royal Academy during the week, and I think one of the big issues is project teams are selected on their IQ, not so much their EQ. And I think the world going forward in such complexity will be as much about EQ and empathy and kindness and how people relate to each other as it will be IQ. And as you all know, I'm sure you all know this, that human beings behave from their perception, not from the deterministic reality. So once you understand that, trust becomes an interesting thing. So people's perceptions are crucial in this. And the best way to adjust people's perceptions is to bind people to one singular purpose, rather than trying to, game people. But yeah, EQ and IQ, I think that's an interesting major programs debate to happen.
Oh, absolutely. So it comes down to the transactional versus relational trust argument. But thanks. We got some questions. David Butler says, I believe platform heights differed and were recognised late in the day. Did this have a major impact, and how should it have been better resolved earlier?
Well, the truth is, because of freight in the UK and the fact that we're bringing a railway through a Victorian railway into a brand new tube, a compromise was always going to have to be made. And the compromise made early was to make the trains level boarding at Heathrow and in the central section. So there was an immediate compromise. Now, whether that was right or wrong, I think at least the project lived in the house of intervention. I think, this idea of house of risk and house of intervention is interesting. So actually, that's an example where they intervened early and made a decision, which was simply the trains will be level at Heathrow and level in the central section, which means there are ramps required on the Victorian Railway. And I'd back them for it. There are other things they could have done. They could have done the opposite, couldn't they? They could have made the platforms on the surface section. And then what would you have done at Heathrow? Rebuild the platforms at Heathrow? So that's a good example, I think, where they intervened in the right area. But it's left us with a historical problem of ramps on surface stations. But that's a good example where they did the right thing. They intervened very, very early, but it had dramatic consequences down the line. Yeah. Other issues, not so clever, where they lived in the house of risk, which was the continual evolution of issues and procrastination.
Okay, thanks very much. We've got another one here. Roger Jones, the owning of the whole principle is a fascinating new perspective on the collaboration ethos. How did you ensure behaviours throughout the organisation, top to bottom, were reinforced, supported, and shifted to meet the higher purpose goals?
Well, for me, it's a great question now. I mean, we actually employed one of the world's greatest organizational psychologists to do this. So I'm speaking like I've come up with this, but actually a guy called Dan Spiewak, S-P-I-W-A-C, Dan Spiewak of JMW, probably the world's leading breakthrough performance person who thinks about perception. He came in and gave us the psychological keys. And the two keys were transparency and owning the whole. So I've got to give it's Dan's intellectual property. How did we do it? Well, it was quite easy, really. That once we had the keys identified, transparency, truth to power, own the whole, find the purpose. Actually, on Crossrail, it was very simple because the project was on its knees. You know, this project was Rocky Balboa knocked out and a count of 8. And these were great people. They'd given their lives to Crossrail. They just wanted it. And everybody loves a comeback story. So on Crossrail, the minute we had the keys to the door, it became catalytic. An interesting question is, how do you institute those at the very beginning? How does Mark Thurston, and I've done a lot of sessions with Mark and his team on this, and a few conversations, at the beginning of projects, how do you hold people to a purpose? And I think it's a lot to do about the contractual bargain. I really think, you know, Chris Julick's done some work on this. I think the days of the NEC might be numbered. I think this idea of transferring risk, intersectional risk, that people can't actually control, distorts behavior. So the thing I would do, if I was starting Crossrail 2, I would be taking a long, hard look at incentivization and risk transfer into the supply chain. I've done some work in Australia recently where they've had PPPs, and wow, that is hard. Because you imagine a PPP with debt and equity on the line, trying to get them to a higher purpose, really difficult. So I think Crossrail, it was very simple once we had the keys. I think the interesting thing is how do you apply to new programs, particularly ones that are in flight already and maybe starting to get into a little bit of difficulty.
Okay, I'd like to have a discussion with you sometime, Mark, on how we brought a military communications project to deliver it. Again, PPI, fascinating. But we have Pete Dye here. I take the same principles apply to the emergency services in collaborative building projects. How do you balance that conflict when people expect dates to commit funding? I have that challenge right now.
Good question. And often when I give this presentation, people ask me that and go a step further and almost say it's impossible to get these projects up without almost cutting the cloth, you know, to get the project funded. You know, you've almost got to. I think the key is, first of all, projects like Crossrail reveal to treasuries and the authorizing environment, you ever say ministers, perm secs, that when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. So I think Crossrail is an interesting story of kind of Christmas future, you know, that could be used as a case study about why you've got to have downside risk. And I think the key is, for me, the key is treasuries. And I've done a lot of work with UK Treasury, done a lot of work with Australian treasuries at state and national level. And the more you can involve Treasury to hold the downside realistic risk, the better, and educate them. Because what happened in Crossrail, there was a value engineering exercise that squashed. It was always an £18 billion project that got squashed into about 14 or 15 billion through some very, very aggressive value engineering. We took all of the intermediate shafts out. So I think to answer your question, it's about truth to power. It's about educating people about the best thing you can possibly do is manage the risk profile and not value engineer the actual widgets out. And I think the best audience for that are government ministers and HM Treasury, because fundamentally, Treasury needs to hold a broad downside risk provision. But if somebody like me says to the Department for Transport it's going to cost £14 billion and I'll do it in 5 years, they're probably going to accept it. But where's the downside risk? And I think it's about Treasury, personally.
Okay, thank you. We got one from Lewis Beals here. How can a project manager or client lead implement this mindset of higher power stroke trust in their teams? And then there's a second part. And how can this apply to smaller projects rather than a mega project like Crossrail?
Wow, brilliant questions. Well, first of all, the first one, I really believe it's got to start at the very, very top. It would be very difficult in a program for one project manager to implement owning the whole, and so it's got to be led from the top. And I think the big lesson really of Crossrail is that the selection of boards, chairs, and CEOs, you should probably pick people on the basis that you want, because at the end of the day, the CEO, the board, set the context for everybody. So I think it's really quite hard for individual project managers. I think program directors, interesting story, I'm doing some work with TransPennine Upgrade, and their program director, Neil Holm, is doing a great job, and he's thinking about the purposeful whole of the TransPennine Upgrade, which is like £10 billion job. Small projects, this is fascinating, and I'd love, as Kevin Keegan might have said once, I'd love to take a small project and think about how you'd apply this. Well, first thing I would do is you'd apply the techniques of modularity and simplicity. You simplify as much as you possibly could. Then I think it would be a massive application of transparency. And what Deloitte have got an interesting new emerging project control set called collision avoidance, which I really like. So if I was running a small medium project, I'd modularize and simplify as much as I could. Then I would get into the business of collision avoidance. And to do that, it's about truth to power, transparency. It's not actually about a Gantt chart and Primavera and P50 and P80. That leaves me quite cold, really. It's about simplification, modularity, and then transparency to have collision avoidance. And yeah, that's what I think. Good question. Never been asked that before. It's a good one.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't seem to have any more questions, but I think what I take sort of from it is trust, communication, good leadership from the top, leadership that's inclusive. And I think this curiosity that you put down, said earlier, is another thing. So in other words, dig deeper than just the surface.
Yeah, and I would have a serious shout out to how do leaders create environments that are kind and allow people to speak without fear. And I think that takes leadership. Really, the days for the shouty, egocentric project manager, they're over. It's over. I'm nearly 58, and yeah, I would say up to my late 30s, I would have been an archetype, quite pushy, pokey project director. I've changed completely, and it's not just a product getting older. There is a place now for kindness and listening, because in the complexity we're in, no one person's got the answer. No one person. And let's make a commitment to make these projects environments where people thrive. And I think that might be the singular biggest lesson.
We've got a couple of minutes left. One more. Are there any parallel insights for HS2?
Oh, well, we've done a tremendous amount of work with Mark Thurston. Jim Crawford, our program director, our technical director, Colin Brown, Chris Binns, the chief engineer. HS2 has bootstrapped all of our lessons, planning in windows of uncertainty, creation of a offsite integration facility to simplify, modularity, purposeful, owning the whole. Mark can now identify what the whole is for Mark. He's even in his supply chain thought very carefully about how does he get beyond collaboration and into integration. So I think Mark's taken all the lessons. He's been the most active user and reader of our lessons, and he's doing a tremendous job. But his job's 40 billion. He's got 2 Crossrails, and that's just phase 1. So it somewhat blows my mind, really. But no, HS2 have really done a tremendous job, and it's very heartening for me to see Mark take our lessons forward, and I think he'll do a great job.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
Thanks, Mark, for your time. Thank you very much. And to everyone who joined us today, thank you very much indeed for joining us. The next time we meet is up on your screen now. So the next date, oh, hang on, there we go. If you want a certificate for today, oh, here we go. 14th of October is our next date. So we're looking at carbon accounting and net zero in construction. So if you'd like to register for that, please go to the site and please do that. If you'd like to get a certificate today, please go to www.mypropass.co.uk. You can register there. If you're already registered, you can get your certificate for today. So all I'd like to say to everyone is many thanks. Sorry for the odd glitch, but we got there and I thought it was a really interesting session. So once again, thanks to Mark, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, please have a great weekend. Thanks. Bye.